Every family has that one person who can't let the spotlight land anywhere else. For me, that person was my younger sister, and she proved it on the most important day of my life. I was 27 and finally walking into the kind of stability I'd worked hard for. Steady job as a middle school teacher, a small condo in Miami, and a fiancé who actually followed through on his promises. The wedding wasn't extravagant, but it mattered to me that it felt personal and unshaken. What I didn't count on was that my sister, Madison, would see my wedding as her own kind of stage. Madison and I had never been close in the easy movie-type sister way. Growing up, she was the one who borrowed my things without asking, who managed to turn every compliment I got into a competition, and who never quite forgave me for being the older one. Our parents brushed it off as normal sibling rivalry, but as adults, it had started to feel less like rivalry and more like a constant, quiet battle. When I got engaged, Madison offered to help with the planning, but I knew better than to expect support without strings attached. It started small. She made jokes about how I should really reconsider my hairstyle because it didn't flatter my face. She hinted that my dress, classic and simple, nothing over the top, looked a little too safe. I brushed it off, because that was Madison's way of reminding me she always had an opinion. But underneath it, I felt that same old knot of irritation building. You probably know the kind. Someone you love, or are at least supposed to love, manages to sour even the happiest moment just by needing to be the center of it. Still, I figured I could manage her. Weddings are stressful, and sisters are sisters. But then came the dress, my prom dress, specifically. It was tucked away in my closet at our parents' house, a pale blue gown I'd worn senior year when, for once, I'd gotten all the attention. I hadn't thought about that dress in years. I didn't even know she remembered it. Turns out, she had, and she decided it wasn't going to stay in the past. The morning of my wedding, when nerves already had me pacing, Madison walked into the bridal suite holding the dress on a hanger. She smiled like she'd just uncovered buried treasure. At first, I thought it was some strange sentimental gesture, like she wanted to laugh about high school before I put on my gown. But her words cut through that thought fast. I was thinking I could wear this today. I can still remember the silence in the room after she said it. My best friend, who was fixing my hair, froze with the curling iron midair. My mom pressed her lips together like she didn't want to get involved. And me? I just stared at her, trying to process why on earth she thought wearing my prom dress on my wedding day was remotely acceptable. At first, I thought she had to be joking. Nobody could be serious about showing up to their sister's wedding in her old prom dress. But Madison didn't smirk or laugh. She held the hanger in front of her body, like she was imagining herself in it. She even said, "It still fits me better than it ever fit you." That line landed sharper than I think she realized, though maybe realizing didn't matter. You've probably had someone in your life like this. Someone who thrives on finding the one spot that'll sting and pressing down on it. Madison had been doing that to me since we were kids. It was never about the dress itself. It was about taking my moment and twisting it so she could step in. That's what she'd done at birthdays, at graduations, even at family barbecues where I thought there wasn't anything to compete over. Now she was trying it at my wedding. I looked around the room, expecting someone else to stop her. My maid of honor glanced at me, waiting to see how I'd respond. My mom pretended to fuss with some flowers. Nobody wanted to get between us, not on a day like that. That's the thing about families. Sometimes they stay neutral to avoid drama, but in doing so they leave you to fight the battle alone. And you either step up or let someone else run over you. So I took a deep breath and told her no. Not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly. "You're not wearing that today." Madison rolled her eyes and tossed the dress onto a chair like it was no big deal. But then she started in with comments, little digs about how my wedding wasn't exactly high society, how my dress looked like something you could buy off the rack at any department store, how she was just trying to add some sparkle. Each remark wasn't explosive on its own, but together they piled up like a slow burn. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just about a dress. It was about a pattern. She wasn't going to stop unless I did something different than I usually did. And here's where you might recognize yourself, because it's easy to shrug off family sabotage as just their personality. It's harder to admit that letting it slide means giving them permission to keep doing it. I didn't want to snap. I wanted to protect my day without it turning into a family scene that people would whisper about for years. So I chose silence, at least for that moment. I ignored her, turned back to the mirror, and let my friend finish curling my hair. I could feel Madison's eyes on me, daring me to react. But instead of giving her what she wanted, I tucked away my anger and decided I'd deal with her in a way she wouldn't expect. The truth is, sometimes the real power move isn't yelling. It's refusing to let someone's chaos shake you in the moment. And if you've ever been pushed by someone who thrives on reaction, you know exactly how hard that can be. By the time the ceremony drew closer, I thought maybe the dress stunt had been her last attempt. Guests were arriving, the photographer was snapping candid shots, and the air in the church buzzed with that nervous, excited energy that only comes with weddings. But Madison wasn't done. She never was. When she walked out of the dressing room, I caught my breath, not because she looked beautiful, but because she'd actually gone through with it. She wasn't wearing the prom dress, but she had picked a gown that looked like it had been designed to mimic a bridal look. Floor-length, white, sequined. It wasn't my wedding dress, but it was enough to blur the lines if someone glanced too quickly. My stomach dropped. Think about that for a second. Every bride expects guests to look nice, maybe even glamorous, but nobody expects their own sister to arrive in something that could pass for a bridal gown. It's one of those unspoken rules everyone understands, except for the person who's determined to break them. Madison stood there smiling like she'd just won a prize. And in a way, she knew she'd pulled focus. People noticed right away. My maid of honor muttered under her breath, and even the wedding coordinator raised an eyebrow. My dad, ever the peacemaker, whispered to me that it was just her way of feeling included. That's the problem with families sometimes. They soften the edges of bad behavior until you start questioning whether you're overreacting. But the truth was plain. Madison wanted to be mistaken for the bride, even if just for a second. I had two choices: call her out publicly or let it slide and risk the whispers circling through the crowd. I chose neither, at least not yet. I kept my focus on what mattered: walking down the aisle, marrying the man I loved, and keeping my dignity intact. It sounds simple, but if you've ever been sabotaged by someone close to you, you know it takes every ounce of willpower not to let anger hijack the entire moment. Inside, though, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to let this pass like all the other times. Not anymore. This wasn't a random party or a family dinner. This was my wedding, and if Madison wanted a stage, I was going to show her she wasn't the director of my story. That realization gave me an odd kind of calm, almost like stepping out of a storm and realizing you're the one holding the umbrella. For the first time, I wasn't scrambling to contain her. I was preparing to redirect her. She just didn't know it yet. The ceremony itself went smoothly, and that was no small miracle. As soon as I stepped into the aisle, I forced my eyes forward and locked onto my fiancée, refusing to glance at Madison even once. I knew if I did, her smirk would stick in my mind, and I wasn't about to let her ruin that walk. The vows, the rings, the kiss, all of it unfolded exactly as I had dreamed, and for that half hour, Madison couldn't touch me. But weddings don't end with a ceremony. The reception is where small dramas stretch their legs. Sure enough, once we made it to the banquet hall, I saw the way people's eyes flicked between me and Madison. She had planted herself at the entrance, greeting guests like she owned the place. Some even hugged her first before making their way toward me. That was the kind of move she specialized in. Subtle, undermining, wrapped in charm. If you've ever had someone close to you who always needs the spotlight, you'll understand the trap. If you ignore them, people might believe their performance. If you confront them, you risk looking bitter or dramatic. Either way, they win. That's how Madison had played me for years. But sitting at the head table with my new husband, I felt something shift. I wasn't the older sister trying to manage a sibling rivalry anymore. I was a woman celebrating her wedding day. That gave me leverage I hadn't used before. When the DJ announced the first dance, Madison made her way toward the floor as if she had been invited. She clapped her hands, smiling broadly, and for a moment, I thought she might actually try to dance beside us. My chest tightened, but I stayed steady. Instead of reacting, I gestured toward the DJ booth and whispered something to the coordinator. Within seconds, the lights dimmed, and the spotlight narrowed to just me and my husband. The room shifted instantly. Every eye turned toward us, and Madison melted back into the crowd where she belonged. That moment gave me more than relief. It gave me proof. You don't always have to fight someone head-on to reclaim your space. Sometimes you just need to redirect the attention to what matters most. And in that spotlight, with music swelling and my husband's hand on mine, I realized Madison could only steal what I allowed her to. But the night was far from over, because Madison wasn't the type to retreat gracefully. And when the champagne started flowing and the toast began, she decided to take her next swing. The toast started out beautifully. My maid of honor gave a heartfelt speech that had half the room wiping tears. My dad followed with a few words that balanced warmth and humor, the kind of speech only a father could give. Then the microphone was left on the table, and Madison, of course, seized it like it had her name written across it. She stood up, dress glittering under the lights, and cleared her throat with exaggerated flair. The crowd clapped politely. After all, she was the sister of the bride. But I knew the look in her eyes. She wasn't there to honor me. She was there to reposition herself in the story. Her speech started with what seemed like fond memories. Stories about us growing up, how she always looked up to me, how she wanted to be just like her big sister. For a second, even I wondered if maybe I had misjudged her intentions. But then her tone shifted. She joked about how I'd always been the responsible one, which apparently made me a little boring. She said it with a laugh, but the room reacted with that uncomfortable kind of chuckle people use when they're not sure if something is funny or cruel. Then she dropped the line that still makes my stomach knot. I mean, who would have thought the girl who once sobbed for 3 days when her prom date canceled would be the first to get married? Her grin stretched wide as a few guests gasped softly. It was one of those moments where the air in the room changes. You've been there, when someone crosses an invisible line, and you realize they didn't just want to tease, they wanted to sting. I sat frozen, forcing a smile that felt more like armor. My new husband reached under the table and squeezed my hand, reminding me I didn't have to react. The DJ, reading the room, jumped in quickly with music to shift attention back to the dance floor. But the damage was done. Madison had gotten her laugh, and worse, she had planted the memory in people's heads. What she didn't realize was that her little performance clarified something for me. All my life, I had played defense against her. I let her throw the punches while I tried to avoid the bruise. But watching her up there, using my wedding as her personal stage, I finally saw her pattern for what it was, a desperate grab for relevance, dressed up as humor. And once you see someone's game clearly, you can start rewriting the rules. That realization settled inside me as the night went on. Madison wasn't going to stop, but I wasn't going to let her define me anymore. And the next chance I had, I was going to show her. Dinner gave me time to breathe. Plates of chicken and steak were served, glasses refilled, and the chatter of guests softened the sting from Madison's speech. I kept my face calm, but inside, I was replaying every second of it, the way her words had hung in the air like little darts. If you've ever been humiliated by someone close to you in front of a crowd, you know how those moments don't just fade, they sit there, daring you to let them define the night. Madison, meanwhile, basked in the attention. She floated from table to table, laughing too loudly, flipping her hair, making sure every eye found her at least once. The sequin gown caught the light every time she moved, like she had dressed herself in a mirror ball on purpose. I could see guests whispering, some looking annoyed, others entertained. That was her sweet spot, living in the blur between shock and amusement, where people couldn't quite decide if she was too much or just bold enough. But here's the truth. When someone hijacks your moment, you don't take it back by outshouting them. You take it back by anchoring people to what really matters. That thought kept running through me as the DJ called couples onto the dance floor. I knew Madison would try to slip in again, and sure enough she did. She danced with my cousins, with groomsmen, even with my father, always spinning toward the center, as if testing how close she could get to being mistaken for the bride. So I adjusted. When my husband and I went for our second dance, I signaled the photographer to pull focus. He followed me onto the floor, snapping shot after shot, flooding the room with camera flashes. Guests circled around us, cheering, clapping, recording on their phones. The energy shifted. People weren't watching Madison anymore. They were watching us. That's the part most people forget about attention. It's not stolen, it's redirected. And the more I leaned into celebrating openly with my new husband, the less room Madison had to wedge herself into the spotlight. By the time dessert rolled out, the crowd was back on track, laughing and enjoying themselves. But Madison never quit easily. She thrived on escalation, and I could see it building in her restless glances and tight smile. It was only a matter of time before she tried one more stunt. I didn't know what it would be, but I was ready. This time, I wouldn't just hold my ground. I'd make sure she understood that her days of turning my milestones into her stage were done. The final push came during the bouquet toss. It's supposed to be a fun, lighthearted tradition, a little moment for the single women to laugh and scramble. I had lined up on the dance floor, bouquet in hand, music playing, guests cheering. It was one of those carefree beats of the night where everyone could relax. But Madison saw it as her chance. As soon as I turned and tossed the flowers, Madison shoved her way past two of my friends and practically lunged for them. She didn't just catch the bouquet, she snatched it, clutched it against her chest, and lifted it high like she had just scored the winning goal in a championship game. The room reacted with awkward laughter and scattered applause. A few people clapped politely, but others exchanged glances that said exactly what I was thinking. She had turned even this small tradition into her own show. Standing there, watching her bask in cheers that weren't meant for her, something inside me settled. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't humiliated. I was done. Done with her games, done with the way she clawed at my moments, done with letting her antics steal oxygen from my life. If you've ever reached that point with someone, a friend, a sibling, a coworker, you know it's not an explosion. It's a quiet, firm line drawn inside yourself. So when Madison tried to spin it into another toast, waving the bouquet around and joking that she might be next in line, I didn't rush to stop her. Instead, I stood, clinked my glass, and took the microphone from the DJ before she could. The room hushed, expecting something serious. I smiled, calm and steady, and said, "I think tonight has made one thing clear. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and nothing, no one, can take that away from me." The guests erupted into applause, louder than anything Madison had stirred up all night. My husband wrapped his arm around me, and the photographer caught it, the moment where the bride reclaimed the stage, not through anger but through clarity. Madison, still holding the bouquet, forced a grin, but for the first time that day, she didn't have a comeback. That was the shift I'd been waiting for. I hadn't embarrassed her, I hadn't screamed, but I had shown everyone, and myself, that I wasn't going to be overshadowed anymore. And once you claim that kind of ground, you don't give it back. The rest of the night rolled on, but I could feel something had changed between us. Madison wouldn't stop trying, that was who she was. But I finally understood I didn't need to fight her every move. All I needed was to stop giving her power over mine. After the bouquet stunt, the reception shifted into a different rhythm. Guests relaxed, the DJ turned up the music, and people filled the dance floor without hesitation. For the first time all evening, I felt like the celebration was mine again. Madison lingered near the edge of the crowd, still in her sequin gown, still holding the bouquet, but the attention had moved on. It wasn't her show anymore, and you could see it on her face. Tight smile, restless eyes, the kind of look someone gets when they realize the spotlight has cooled. I danced with friends, posed for pictures, and let myself breathe. That's something you don't always notice until the pressure lifts, how heavy it feels to be bracing against someone else's sabotage. But once I claimed my ground, I stopped bracing. I laughed, I ate cake with my new husband, I even joined a com de line started by my uncle. Madison had no choice but to drift to the sidelines. If you've ever dealt with someone who constantly tests your boundaries, you know the quiet victory isn't about them apologizing, it's about them losing control over you. That's what I felt that night. Every time Madison tried to slide back into the center, asking the DJ for song requests, flagging the bartender for special cocktails, people brushed her off. She had overplayed her hand, and the room knew it. At one point, she came up to me holding the bouquet and said, "Guess it's my turn next." Her voice was light, teasing, but her eyes searched mine, waiting for a reaction. I just smiled and said, "Then I hope you find what you're looking for." And then I turned back to my husband, leaving her standing there with nothing to feed off. That silence, that refusal to engage, did more than any fight could have. By the end of the night, When guests were saying their goodbyes and the staff began clearing tables, Madison was still in her gown, still gripping the bouquet like proof of something. But nobody was looking at her anymore. They were hugging me, congratulating us, telling me how beautiful the day had been. It struck me then, Madison hadn't ruined my wedding. She had tried, but all she managed to do was spotlight exactly what I'd been blind to before. Her need to compete wasn't my problem to solve. My only job was to stop letting it define me. And standing there with my husband's hand in mine, I knew I had finally done that. What I didn't realize until later was that this shift wouldn't just change the wedding day. It would change the way I handled Madison and myself for years to come. When the last guests trickled out and the music faded, I finally had a moment of quiet. My husband and I sat together at the head table, shoes kicked off, plates of half-eaten cake in front of us. The room looked like every wedding reception does at the end of the night. Streamers on the floor, glasses left behind, a few wilted flowers. But for me, it felt like something more had ended than just the party. Madison drifted over, bouquet still in her hand, sequins catching the dim light. She tried to keep her usual air of confidence, but there was a tension in her posture I hadn't seen before. She said, "Well, you got through it." The words were light, but there was an edge in her tone, like she had been hoping I'd crack. For once, I didn't feel the urge to explain, to defend, or to match her tone. I simply nodded and replied, "Yes, I did." That was it. No lecture, no fight. Because here's the truth. Sometimes the most powerful response to someone who thrives on chaos is no response at all. When you stop playing the game, you take away their win. And I realized, sitting there in my wedding dress at the end of the night, that I'd been playing her game for most of my life. She lingered, waiting for more, but when none came, she finally turned and walked off. That image stuck with me. Her figure retreating across the empty dance floor, bouquet still clutched like a consolation prize. For the first time, I saw her not as my rival, but as someone caught in her own loop of needing to be noticed. And I felt something surprising, not anger, but release. Later, back at the hotel, I thought about how often we let people close to us set the rhythm of our lives. You probably know the feeling, bending, adjusting, keeping peace, until one day you realize peace never really comes that way. It only comes when you decide you're done being pulled into the same old pattern. That night, I drew my line, not with a speech, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a calm certainty that Madison's grip on my milestones ended here. The wedding had been mine, the marriage was mine, and the future would be too. Still, I knew Madison. She wouldn't disappear. She'd find new ways to test the boundaries. But now, the difference was clear. I wasn't the older sister fighting to keep her in check anymore. I was someone who had learned that dignity doesn't come from controlling someone else. It comes from refusing to be controlled. In the weeks after the wedding, people kept bringing it up. Guests who had been there would tell me how beautiful the ceremony was, how much fun the reception turned out to be. Some of them even mentioned Madison, but not in the way I feared. They said things like, "She sure wanted attention," or, "You handled her with such grace." For the first time, the comments didn't sting. They confirmed what I already knew, that she hadn't stolen the night, and I hadn't let her. Madison herself didn't apologize. She never does. Instead, she sent a text 2 days later. "Hope you had fun. Everyone said I looked amazing." It would have once sent me spiraling, but I just stared at it, smiled, and put my phone down. Because here's the shift. You stop waiting for someone like that to change, and you change the way you deal with them. Back at work, when my students asked about the wedding, I told them it was wonderful. I shared the details that mattered, the vows, the dancing, the cake. Not once did I mention Madison's antics, because I realized that telling the story was my choice too. And if I chose to focus on joy instead of chaos, that's what lived on. Of course, there will always be family events, holidays, and gatherings where Madison and I cross paths. She'll still dress a little too flashy, talk a little too loud, push a little too far. That's her. But something shifted inside me. Her behavior no longer feels like a storm I have to survive. It's just weather passing by while I stay steady in my own place. If you've ever had someone in your life who tries to rewrite your moments, you probably know what I mean. There comes a point where you realize they can only take the stage if you hand them the microphone. And once you stop handing it over, They shrink down to their real size. My wedding day wasn't flawless. It wasn't the glossy, picture-perfect event you see in magazines, but it was mine. It was full of laughter, love, and the kind of lessons you don't forget. And as for Madison, she'll always be my sister, but she'll never again be the author of my milestones. That was the bittersweet part of